Hello, welcome back to another episode of Read This, our spoiler-free comic book roundup of the best books from last week. Let's jump right into it with DC. Only one from DC this time. Superman, Son of Kal-El, number 14. Written by Tom Taylor, with art by Cyan Tormé, colors by Federico Blee, and letters by Dave Sharp. If you haven't been following this one, most recently it's been about Superman's son and his new boyfriend, who is from an island called Gomorrah. The people of Gomorrah have been ruled over by Lex Luthor, who's experimenting on them and turning them into superpowered beings, and he's using those to attack Metropolis so that he can send out his own team of superheroes to go and take them down and make himself look better. What's happening now is that John and his boyfriend and his organization, they want to go and liberate the people of Gomorrah. They want to take out Lex Luthor, who's their dictator, and free the people. What's so awesome about this is that John wants to do it in the most peaceful way possible. There are lots of people on Gomorrah who have been turned into like monstrous creatures or very strong, superpowered people, and he wants to take out the dictator that's ruling them, not punish the people themselves who are victims. So early on in this issue, a big group of heroes are introduced, and at that point I was kind of worried. I was thinking, like, there are so many brand new characters, how is this going to work out? And actually, it worked out really well. I shouldn't have doubted Tom Taylor for a second. If you see his name on a book, it's going to be good, and this is no exception. The new characters are introduced and they are the backup. They're going to help Superman, but they don't take away the focus at all. So in a way we don't learn too much about them, but on the other hand I think that's good. I actually think that was the right way to go about it. They don't take focus away from the meat of the story. Jay is going to bust into a facility. He wants to free the people that are in there. And he goes about it in this ingenious way, using both his superpower, which is allowing him to enter the building through the walls. He's using that power in a really clever way to get inside. And then also, instead of a big fight, which easily could have been what happened inside, he comes at the situation in a different way that is brilliant and makes total sense, and is just the most peaceful way that it could be done. And that's something that isn't really done in comics, you know? That isn't the way that things usually go in comics. Characters bust in and there's usually a fight. And often that fight doesn't serve any real purpose. There's no weight to it because the characters are just fighting somebody for the sake of having a fight, because that's what comics are about sometimes. I much prefer this way, where they're being clever and their intentions are really good. Like, I'm rooting for them because their intentions are good and they're doing the right thing in the right way, and it's so awesome to read that. Tom Taylor's taken over both Nightwing and he started this Superman Son of Kal-El series, and both are about heroes that want to do good, but on a bigger scale than just solving crimes or beating up thugs or taking on supervillains. They're effecting real change that's going to improve life for dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of people, and reading that is awesome. Superhero comics kind of parallel life in that way, where there's an obstacle, we overcome it, and then we continue on with our lives. It's kind of a metaphor in that way. But in these comics, the characters are doing things that we should all be doing. They're making big changes. They're looking at the big picture, and they're making real change in their communities and further out. It's amazing. Next, we're on to Aftershock, and There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd, number 2. Written by Ed Brisson, with art by Gavin Giardri, colors by Chris O'Halloran, and letters by Hassan Otmani Al-Haw. This one is about a young man who discovers he has the power to control people's minds. And what he's been doing in the first issue is using those people to rob banks. But he's been letting those people get caught because the people he's deciding to control to get to do these things for him have done something wrong in the past. He feels like they deserve to get in trouble. So he's kind of making himself some money, and then he's putting away a criminal, and he's not tying himself to any of these things at all. It's kind of brilliant, actually. In the first issue, at the very end, we learned that someone is after him, and we don't quite know who this person is. And in this issue, he had a really smart plan to find information about him. And so we see him trying to track him down in this issue, but he hasn't quite found him yet. Meanwhile, Patrick had a bunch of money he made from the bank jobs that he made other people pull, and that money got stolen by somebody who worked at the motel he was staying in. And that person has a run-in with the police, and the police want to find out how they came by this money, and also how these bank robberies are connected. So on one hand, we've got like a supernatural kind of adventure, kind of heist going on. We have this character that's trying to hunt down our protagonist, and then we have this kind of police procedural thing where there's the guy who's hunting for Patrick, and we're watching him try to piece all of this together. At the end of this issue, Patrick finds out that this person is after him, and he decides instead of being chased, he's just going to go and confront the guy head on. But as yet, we don't know what this guy wants or what's going to happen to Patrick after this. Because there are multiple threads and every thread is very interesting, this comic works really well. Having a young character who has mind control powers and using those powers to gain things and to get money is kind of a pretty obvious story. So because of these different threads going on, the way that the policeman is trying to look for Patrick, the things that are going on with Patrick himself, and this other really strange, kind of creepy character, the book has a lot more depth than it might seem on the surface than maybe a synopsis of the plot would let on. And it's getting so tense, I want to find out what's going to happen when Patrick finally meets this guy and why he's looking for him. So yeah, super solid series and really intriguing. Next, we're moving on to Marvel with Predator #1, written by Ed Brisson, with art by Kev Walker, colors by Frank D'Armata, and letters by VC's Clayton Cowles. This is the first Predator comic book from Marvel, and it's really solid. The story feels a bit much for me, but it might be an intentional throwback to how the original Predator movie is. It's an 80s movie, it's a bit over the top. The story in this is a bit far-fetched, and I think it might be knowingly that way. So the story flits between two time periods in the main character's life. One is when she was very young, and one is now that she is older. When she was younger, she was living on a planet that humans were trying to terraform and kind of build a place to live there. But on that planet there were also predators, and I'm sure you can figure out what's going to happen from there. So she has a terrible event that happens in her childhood, and that leads her to being an adult who wants to hunt down predators. She's actually looking for one in particular, but she finds these recording devices on their ships, and it shows like hunting routes that they're going on, and when one predator is taken out, another predator picks up their hunting route. So she has a way using those devices to track the one specific predator that she's looking for. And that's where it feels a little bit silly to me. She's traveling around in space, like vast distances, to try and catch this one predator who wronged her in the past. And while that's enough motivation to keep her going and to keep the comic interesting, it feels crazy to me that you'd go traveling for so long, for so much of your life, just to take out one person who did you wrong. When I was a bit younger, I used to really like revenge stories because it felt like anything that the main character did had been justified. So it was okay for you as a reader or as a viewer to enjoy them doing things that were maybe morally questionable or violent. Now I'm a little bit older, it feels kind of silly. If it were me, I would just be like, let it go. Yeah, it was terrible. It was really, really terrible. But wasting the rest of your life chasing down this creature and then killing it, and then, you know, ultimately you're not going to feel any better and you'll have wasted so much of your life. Regardless of how I feel about it, it was fun to watch her doing it. Though I had to take the story with just a little grain of salt. Marvel's already putting out an awesome Alien series, and now they're starting out with a great Predator series. And it feels kind of inevitable that the two are going to cross over, and when they do, it's going to be awesome. Sticking with Marvel, we're on to The Punisher, #5, written by Jason Aaron, Jesus Saiz, colors by Dave Stewart, and letters by VC's Corey Petit. So The Punisher is a character that I've never read before, so this is my first ever Punisher book. And honestly, it's a good place to start. They're filling out a lot of his backstory, which I think was never done before. We know that Frank Castle is a ruthless killer, and that's always been blamed on his traumatic incident that he had where he lost his wife and his children in a shooting at a park. But this gives us a lot of information about when he was really young, and it's really twisted. He was a killer even as a young man, and going back and seeing those things that he did, he's not okay. Frank is not a well boy. And what's brilliant about this series is that we're getting that filled in slowly over each issue, but as we're seeing the formative years of him becoming really a ruthless killer, he's also become part of the Hand, which is an organization that kind of worship him. They want him to be like a god of war. But he's starting to realize that that organization is really not on the level, and that the people that are in that organization, though obviously they were not the best people to begin with, are really way more twisted than he thought. So we're getting to learn that Frank Castle is a lot worse than we thought, but also the situation he's in now is a lot worse than he thought it was, and he's not prepared to stick around where he is now, and he wants to escape. The Hand have given him his wife back. She's back from the dead, and he tries to escape the place that they're in with her, and then he finds out that he can't do that. They've made a way to trap him there. So Frank kind of wants to put his war to rest. He wants to stop being the Punisher, I guess, and just settle down with his wife. But there's another god of war who considers him one of his disciples, and he is not happy about that. There's so much interesting stuff going on in this series, and I wonder how long it can really last. It's great, but I feel like there's only so much time left of his youth, and there's only so much you can do with this story. I have no idea how it's going to end. Of course, it's not going to be able to end with him settling down, because then it will be really difficult to have any more Punisher comic books. But the only other option is him beating a god, and I don't really know if he can do that. So I don't really have a window of comparison, but I feel like this is a special run on Punisher, and it's a defining run for the character. And lastly, from Marvel, Miss Marvel and Wolverine #1, written by Jody Houser, with art by Zé Carlos, colors by Eric Arciniega, and letters by VC's Travis Lanham. Miss Marvel is another character I don't really know that much about. I played the Avengers game, in which she's kind of the main character for quite a while, and for me she was a bit 50-50 in that one. She was likeable in some moments, in others she was so eye-rolly, and her sense of humour was terrible. And I also watched a little bit of the Miss Marvel TV show, which again has some interesting things to say about being an immigrant child in America, but it also involves kind of a high school love triangle, and she's a young character, and while she is really charming and likable in that show, she's still too young for me to be really interested in what's going on in her life, to be honest with you. So then you might ask, why did you bother to read this? I tried to give everything, if it's a new #1, at least a chance, and I'm so glad that I did in this case, because this was so much more fun than I had ever expected. In this one, Kamala's going through the park in New York, where the X-Men's treehouse is, and she sees Wolverine there. And she's talking about she kind of had a team up with him before, they know each other a little bit, and she's feeling nervous to say hello to him because she has worked with him, but they're not friends like that or anything. But Wolverine has a really good sense of smell, so he smells that she's there, and he comes over to her and he talks to her. While they're there together, the X-Men's treehouse starts to get attacked by these like robot bee things, and after that it's up to Kamala and Wolverine to take out all these things. They're taking samples of blood and they're going to take them back to somebody. There are a couple of things I really liked about this comic. One of them is that Wolverine has two sides to him. He's like a really rough, gruff man, but also he can be so kind to people sometimes. And it's not every writer that uses that side of him, but they really use it in this one. He's so nice to Kamala, and she comes up with this brilliant plan to use Wolverine's powers and Storm's powers to get rid of a whole swarm of these robotic bugs is ingenious, which is another thing I love when mutant powers are combined. They're calling them circuits in the X-Men books now. When there's a really clever mutant circuit, that was great to see. But also the circuit causes Wolverine a lot of pain, and it was Kamala's idea, so she feels really sheepish afterwards. And she goes to speak to him, and he's just lovely to her, because she's a young girl. And she helped them out. I love that side of Wolverine, and I really wish it came out more often. There's a couple other mutant circuits that get made in the book, and that's really fun to watch. I really get a kick out of being smart and combining powers in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of straight away. And that's pretty much all that happens in the book. They fight off these bugs, and then at the end there's a reveal about what the bugs were doing there. What it feels like is a way to introduce newer readers or fans of Miss Marvel to some of the X-Men they might not know about. So it's a nice introduction, and even if you know the characters, it's really fun to see them interacting in that way and combining their powers in ways that they don't usually do. So this one is a great time. I was totally surprised by how much I enjoyed this, but it was great fun. Next, we're moving on to Image Comics and Starhenge #2, written, illustrated, and lettered by Liam Sharp. This one is a really strange mixed bag of a book. Let's start off with the artwork, because to be honest with you, that's the thing I like the most about this book. The artwork is fantastic. It is beautiful. The color choices are great. The style is amazing. It looks fantastic. I really love the way that this book looks. The story has an interesting concept, but my problem personally with it is that I don't like the narrator. I think it's a really well written young woman, but she's a young woman who is a little bit self-confident. She knows something that you don't know, and she's explaining it to you. And she thinks she's really funny and clever, and personally I don't think she's either of those things. I find her really grating, and that's a shame because it takes away from the enjoyment of the book for me. The basis of this story is that in the future, there is magic. In fact, there has always been magic. But something happened in the past that took away magic. So what they're doing is, in the future, they're sending somebody back to the past to make sure that that doesn't happen, that magic gets to stay. But that person is Merlin. And Merlin goes back to the past, and in this issue builds Stonehenge, which is in some way going to help preserve magic in the future. So there's a lot of backwards and forwardsing. There's also a kind of romance going on with the narrator. And I don't know how the narrator is involved exactly in the future yet, but we're only on issue 2 of 6, so there's a lot more to come that will flesh out the story, and eventually I'm hoping it's going to tie up neatly. But really, I can't stress how amazing the artwork is in this book. Given how much I dislike the narrator, I still really want to read it just because it's so gorgeous to look at. So I'm hoping it comes together a bit more in the future, but I'm for sure going to keep reading it just because it's visually such a treat. And the last one for today, we're on to Vault Comics and Mindset #2, written by Zach Kaplan, with art by John Pearson, and letters by Hassan Othmani El Hao. This one is about a group of college students who have, through experimentation, figured out a way to make mind control possible. They found a frequency of sound and light that makes somebody suggestible for a small window of time. That's what they discovered in the first issue, and also at the very beginning of the first issue we learned that they've used this thing to incorporate it into an app, and also there's been a murder. At the beginning of this issue, they're figuring out their ground rules. They know that they can control somebody's mind, but they're trying to figure out morally how best to use it. And they decide that they need to test it on some people outside of their friendship group. So they take it to some college parties and they start to use it there. And while they're doing that, that's when they start to lay down the rules like we can't use it on each other, we can't make somebody kill somebody, that kind of stuff. So after the college parties, they end up at this really, really fancy party and they start using their new toy there. And it's during that time that they discover that one of their friends is a lot more ruthless than the rest of them. A lot of them have kind of quibbles and scruples about what they're doing, but this one guy seems not to care about any of that stuff. He wants to do what he wants to do. And then towards the end of the issue, they come up with the idea for the app, which is kind of wrapping us around back to the first issue. So while this is another mind control comic, it's another really grounded take too. The way that they discovered how to do it was more interesting than just a superpower. And then they're really thinking about the big picture when they're talking about how to use this and what they can do with it. And since they're college students, they're studying, they found this new thing and they went about testing it in a scientific way. They tested it on themselves first, and then they went out to test it on some other people to really make sure they know how much it works. They figure out the effectiveness window, they figure out the after effects, and now they're starting to worry also about the long-term effects, what's going to happen in the long term when they use this on somebody. So it's a really grounded take and it feels more science fiction than fantasy, if that makes any sense. It feels a lot more based in science than just superpowers. I think that's why personally I like it so much, and also the artwork again is fantastic. If you've read The Department of Truth, the artwork in here puts me in mind of that a little bit. It's a bit scratchy, the colors are kind of powdery, almost like chalk or pastels. Everything has a texture to it and it looks great. And that's it. Those are the best books that I read in the past week. If you enjoyed this video, take a look around the rest of the channel for some more spoiler-free comic book review roundups. Give me a follow on Twitter at boxesandbubbles to hear about these books in real time as I read them, and to hear about all the books that don't make it into this video. If you want to give me a hand, share this video around to your friends, give me a sub and a like, and of course, as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye bye!